Welcome to the Fantasy Femme Fatales podcast, your front row seat to the hottest takes, rawest reactions, and where badass FMCs feel right at home. I'm so excited about today's episode. Devin, aka Mr. Romantasy, is co-hosting this episode with me. We have so much to talk about.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself in a second here, but I did want to highlight that at the end of today's episode, I'm going to be announcing the next Quick Lit book, and that episode will be dropping real soon. And I'm really excited about this one because I'm reading the book right now, and it is so worth the hype.
Nice.
Yes. Devin has read this book too. We're getting into reader expectations and bookish hot takes. So, whether you read romantasy, fantasy, or other genres, expectations play a huge role in your reading experience. Add to that perceptions and judgments, those voices that creep in and say that book isn't for you before you've even read the synopsis. It's a loaded topic, and we've got a lot to say about it. But before we get into the good stuff, Devin is a new and prominent voice in the online book space. And if you don't follow him already, you should. And after today's episode, I'm sure you will be, because he provides such a great perspective on this complex space that we know and love. So, Devin, why don't you tell the people a bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. That was very kind words and feels very high bar. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so I'm Devin. I run Romantasy, which started as a review blog and has transformed into content. So I didn't read for about 14 years up until January of last year. Second daughter was born and she wouldn't sleep through the TV. So reading became the default. I started with ACOTAR because JJ Watt was reading it and I was like, I'll give it a shot. I always liked fantasy and I crushed that entire series in like 2 weeks. And then I jumped around. I read Red Rising, I read Throne of Glass, and I found there was nobody to talk to about the books in like my personal circle. So I started the blog because everything I saw from a guy's perspective was either not reading it at all or talking about it in a way that was just trying to make content by dunking on it. So got on Instagram and started connecting with other people, both male and female creators, which was really cool to see guys in the space not talking negatively. And now we're here. It's become quite a thing very quickly.
Yeah, you're doing great. And I think it's that openness to talk about something that people haven't been talking about. And as women, we feel pushed down a lot, and the things that we like are not given the same credit. It's so refreshing to have a male perspective to say, oh, this stuff is good too. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So we appreciate you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's very funny. I originally started this with the idea of like bridging the genre gap or something like that. I thought I was witty, but the idea was to try to get more guys to read Romantasy. And then I started to realize things in the space that I was like, this is kind of weird, and started to talk about it in a way that wasn't attacking everybody.
Yes.
And the dynamic has shifted so much since then. It's been really interesting because the one thing I didn't want to do was make it seem like I had to speak on. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
feel that is the case by any means.
No,
And I've always tried to make sure that the content was very clear. Like, this is my perspective on what's happening and not this needs to be the way it goes.
totally makes sense. I think that where it intersects is that you share perspectives that are your own. And I know that there are more men in the space than we might think about a lot of the time that have those views as well. So hearing it echoed back from a different perspective is where people really attach to that. We don't have to get into like the toxic aspect of some of these book spaces, but it can get that way where
Hmm.
it's really like rage baity, and you found a way to talk about things that I think are worth talking about.
Yeah, that's always been the goal. It was never rage bait drives me crazy because that's exactly what it is, and nothing comes of it. You have people on both sides of the line when you have rage bait content, and that's it. I've had a lot of surprising conversations with both men and women about the topics that it's either given me new insight or I've been able to just shed a different light. I don't think I'm converting people into like romantasy diehards by any means.
I know that I had my own judgments about
Mhm.
certain books. It's just like good as a human to explore things that you haven't explored before and actually get your own take on how you feel. And if you don't like it, that's okay, but you know what it is now.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Why don't we get into the heart of our conversation here? Because I know we're going to have a ton to talk about.
Sure.
So, how do you think reader expectations impact the books that people actually choose to pick?
I mean, it's such an interesting space because a lot of it comes down to marketing. Some of it is social media, but majority of it I want to say is marketing. With Romantasy being as huge as it is, it's in the best interest of the publisher and even arguably an author to fit into the space even if it shouldn't. And I think when you give somebody an expectation of something by the way you market it and the way you talk about it, and they go into it and they don't get what they expect, it's never a good time. And the only person that ends up hurting it is the reader because you've already bought the book. I will say that it's much more marketing than authors,
Hmm.
90% of the time. But yeah, it's such a interesting space because expectation's so important when you go into it, especially with there's so much to read and so little time. So if you're going in, you're 25% into the book till you figure out, oh, this isn't what they said it is. It's just a bad experience. And then it starts these preconceived conversations, and I can guarantee that's probably where the fairy smut came from. Somebody got suggested this book, was told that it was, Lord of the Rings, and then they
Hmm.
picked it up and they were like, what is happening here? And that was it. And they had a spice tolerance of 0, which is fine. Like some people don't like it at all. But trying to tell people, hey, you should go read this. And then, yeah.
I also wonder, like, bookstores are interesting because they haven't adopted the same types of labels that Goodreads and these sorts of book reference platforms use. So you have Romantasy side by side with epic fantasy. So I could see a publisher taking a more fantasy approach to a book and someone picking up a smutty romantasy book and being like, what the hell is this? And really not having a clue of what they were getting into. And then there's a judgment made. But I think there's so many different ways that those expectations get built and can hurt the reader. I do think that it can hurt an author. I often feel like the publishing houses and the marketers are really not doing their authors justice in situations where they are leaning heavily into what's popular and not being true to the nature of the book, because you always want to target your target audience,
Hmm.
even if your target audience you think is small, because at least you'll hit the people you want to hit and then they will talk about it. But you get that book in the wrong hands, word of mouth is huge in the book community. It's a hard one.
Yeah. And reading's one of those spaces where people build loyalty to an author specifically, where you will hear people say all the time that I'll buy anything they put out. I don't care what genre it is, what it is, I will buy it. Like Christopher Rucchio is that person for me. Like
Hmm.
he could write a guide on how to mow your lawn and I'd pick it up. But it's the same on the inverse side. Like, so many people have gotten a bad rec or an intro to an author that probably wasn't the best fit for them, and they will write it off. They'll never touch a book by that author again. And like you said, I think from a marketing perspective, it's the long-term value, I would say, is probably better. The idea is that cost of acquisition and then cost of holding that and making
Hmm.
it the value there is why acquisition costs can be high as long as the long-term return is there. And I
Hmm.
think in reading, specifically books, is very, very much a long game because you got to get people to buy in and then wait 2 years for the next book.
Yeah, and it happens in genre spaces too, right? Like ACOTAR is like such a common entry point experience for people. I was actually talking to some friends last night and we were talking about, like, if you read ACOTAR now,
Hmm.
would you have the same love for it that you had because it was your entry point and you've read so much in between and you've seen these tropes appear in a bunch of different books? And the truth is, probably not. It probably wouldn't be that experience for you, and you would probably be like, what's the hype on this book? Why is everyone so obsessed with it? And you see people have those experiences when they're coming to them later. Like, I will see it in the community and someone's asking, like, should I read this series? And it's like, maybe, maybe not. Like, it depends. And I think that happens with other genres. Like, it depends what your entry point is. You might then have a judgment on that genre based on the first experience you had.
Yeah, I made a reel about this. ACOTAR's a terrible entry point in Romantasy, and that is somebody whose entry point was ACOTAR. The biggest problem, and this is not just Romantasy, this is fantasy, everything that has a long series. You have to sell people by saying, you gotta get through the first book.
Hmm.
And nothing is harder than saying, hey, dedicate 400 pages to get to the good stuff. And it's such a
Hmm.
reader coded thing. Like anything else in the world, if I said that to you, you'd be like, yeah, okay, and walk away. And that would be the end of the conversation.
Yeah, invest 12 hours.
Yeah, watch season 1 of this show so that you can watch the rest of it when it gets good. It's not a thing outside the reading space. And somebody's first introduction to a genre is very, very important because that is going to make or break whether they'll continue it. It's very much recommendations need to be tailored to the reader and
Hmm.
not what's popular, what's hyped, what's selling. Anytime I give recs now, I very much lean like, what do you like about X book that you've read? Like this is your favorite book, why? And
Hmm.
then you can kind of develop the patterns, whether it be tropes or, just like emotional notes, that kind of stuff, where you can take it away and say, okay, like Fourth Wing. People like to dunk on Fourth Wing all the time. It is such a good entry point
Yeah.
to the genre. It's fast. You're in it right away. Whether you're a fantasy fan, a romance fan, you get all of it up front very quickly. Is it all the greatest stuff in the world? No, but it doesn't matter because you're in it enough and you're bought in enough to at least want to know what's going to happen. And
Hmm.
then you get to the dragons and then it's worth it.
Right, then you're hooked in. Yeah, there are obviously so many people who that's their god tier, and they've read other romantasy, and so that is great too. And I think that gets lost a lot in the book space. I feel for readers sometimes who aren't as active and as exposed because there is this social pressure that exists in the book space that is the best intentions, but it creates this definitive, this is the best book and you need to read it. And it's just not true, right? Like if someone read the synopsis or the little blurb on ACOTAR and they were like, I don't know if I'm going to like that, listen to that instinct because there are so many books to choose from. And if you don't in your gut think that that appeals to you, there's a good chance it's not going to. And it really sucks investing in a book and being disappointed.
Yeah, I call it unintentional gatekeeping.
Okay.
Whether you're a reader or somebody that watches shows, it doesn't matter what it is. You want to show it to somebody and share it, and you want them to enjoy it just as much as you did. And when that doesn't happen, your instant reaction as a person, in my opinion, is always going to be like at least a tiny bit defensive. You're going to have this, like, if it's something you viscerally love, and I feel like readers, especially, you read something and it resonates with you so deeply. It's so like you recommend all the time, and then you recommend it to somebody and they don't like it. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, no, you read it wrong. Like, no,
Yeah.
you missed this point. And it's kind of like it's coming from a good place in a sense, but it just doesn't make sense because
Mm-hmm.
not everybody is the same. And
Right.
not everybody's going to love every piece of what you loved. My favorite thing to do is recommend something to somebody and they enjoy it, but they don't like it for the same reasons I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think that's so interesting to see what people take away from reading. I think that, to your point, people that are not terminally online don't understand. All of a sudden, you come into the space and you're like, "Oh, I didn't really like Mistborn," and people are like, "Yeah,
Right.
how dare you? You don't understand reading. You don't get it." And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
"This is ridiculous."
Mm-hmm.
People like what they like. You don't have to love what I love. You can dunk on the book as long as it's constructive and respectful. I don't care. I'm not getting into a 14-page dissertation on why I think you should like a book you don't like.
No, and to be fair, you and that person have inherently had fundamentally different experiences going into that book because you found that book the way that you found it, and maybe you didn't have a bar set super high. And so that really allowed you to enjoy it, where that person now thinks this book is going to change their life. And that's a hard place to go into a book from. I find that all the time. I'm afraid to read really hyped books because I really want to love them. But that's why I love reading arcs, because if I can find something that I love and there is nothing that's going to cloud my judgment, it feels
Mhm.
amazing. I love that experience.
Yeah, hype can kill a book so fast. And that sounds so counterintuitive because you want it hyped and like, as an author that's what you want. But it sets a very high bar you have to live up to. Arcs are very tough. So like to your point, I love getting an arc, but it can almost go the opposite way where you're like, I loved this thing, and then it comes out and everybody's like, what were you talking about? Like this is
Yeah.
awful.
But that's fine.
Oh yeah.
I don't mind. I actually really like when people tell me that they didn't like a book because it sets the bar really low. And I've said, I think that I love books that people hate because I think they're not going to be good. And then I'm like, no, that was actually a good time. So I think it can go both ways. But I think the trick is when you are so inundated with book content and perspectives is to have the discernment between someone else's experience and someone else's view. And I'm going to take the nuggets that feel valuable from that piece of content, but I'm going to walk in with my own expectations, because then you get to have your own experience. And maybe the other person didn't do that and they really thought it was going to be perfect to their own personal taste. And how can that be?
Yeah, it's recommending a book in general is tough for a multitude of reasons. I recommend what I enjoy,
Mhm.
and I tell you why I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
If I tell you I liked that it's enemy to lovers and it was real enemy to lovers, or I like how dark and gritty it was,
Mhm.
and you don't like that stuff, and then
Yeah.
you still pick up the book, that is not on me. I gave you all the shots. I'm also a person that I don't read blurbs. I buy books based on the cover, or 12 people told me I was going to love it, and
Yeah.
barely touched the surface of why. I mean, it's worked out most times, but
Yeah. I'm more like you. I'd rather talk about my experience of a book and what I picked up on because, like, I recommended a book that I didn't like to a friend because
Mhm,
the way she was talking, I felt like, I think you'll like this better than Akatar. And she loved it. So you can cater your recommendation to someone else, but you can't do that when you're creating content for, thousands of people to see. You just have to talk about your own take on it, I think. But you see it a lot, right? You see these blanket statement approaches to book recommendations and they've led me astray. So I see the difference now and why it's just not my comfort zone.
yeah, it's the book space is interesting. Like, I
Hmm.
love it, and I love getting to talk books. I literally started it because I wanted to talk about books with people. But sometimes there's an expectation that I think is very weird, and I try to curve that a little bit, and I'm just like, "Hey, it might be a dud. You might hate it." But I think to your point too is like recommending something that you didn't enjoy to somebody else because you listen to somebody talk about a book and they'll say, "Oh, I love when this happens," or "I loved this part of X book," and whatever. And I go to myself, "Well, I hated that, but
Yeah.
this book had that." So you might enjoy it because you liked all the things I liked about the book, but you also like the things I didn't enjoy about the book,
Hmm.
which means it's probably going to be a 5-star read for you, where it was like a 2 or a 3 for me.
Yes. It is that ability to not look at books as super black and white either. I
Hmm.
think you do that really well. You can take from a book experience that you didn't love good things from it. I love an emotional read. I love something with depth, but I don't go off if I didn't like a book. I will kind of sit and process it. And so I see that sometimes the strong personalities and the
Hmm.
visceral reactions. So it gives you that ability to maneuver and help people fall in love with a space that you fell in love with. That I think is really.
Yeah, I do like a story that is emotionally gripping in one way or another, whether that's despair, happiness, love, whatever the case may be. I never remember the description of a pillar in a courtyard and how
Mhm.
detailed it was, but
Mhm.
I do remember how I felt when X thing happened in the book to X character.
Mhm.
And when they ask me how I decide if a book is good or not, I'm like, what do I remember about the book? Sun Eater is hands down my favorite series ever. Loved every minute of it. I can't give you minute details about certain things in the story. Anything I truly remember is tied to some type of an emotion that happened in that book.
Let's shift gears a little bit. This is one of my favorite topics. So, let's talk gender stereotypes in book spaces. So, where do you see gender stereotypes showing up in book spaces?
This is such a loaded question. No, I'm kidding. No, it is a very prominent thing. It's very much a gender-based thing most of the time in this space, especially when it comes to romantasy. It's the discourse is ridiculous most of the time. It's very much obviously skewed towards female authors, female creators, that kind of stuff, where they will have to deal with things that I will never have to deal with. And I know that. I recognize it. And almost in the inverse, which is kind of weird. Recently, I made like a bro book reel. There was a trend going around where they're like, these are the 5 bro books that aren't X, Y, and Z or to get you in a reading. And if you're a guy's guy, you'll love these books. And I was kind of like, I'm going to make the same video, except I'm going to be ridiculous about it. I had Red Rising, Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I think Will of the Many. And I was just like, yeah, these are super bro books, but you like it because you're absolutely emotionally destroyed by the end of it. Like, you don't care that he's in a video game world or whatever. You
Mhm.
give a shit that he has that found family. It's a resistance story. And that was kind of the point. And that was well received by both men and women because it was like poking fun at the whole situation, but not. It was kind of like pointing out why it works across genders. And I saw a female creator made a very similar video, and she caught so many people saying, "You can't call this a boy book. You can't gender the book." You da 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 da. And what took me back was that I expect to go into like a female creator's content talking about a guy book
Mhm.
and see guys either praising it or shitting on them for whatever opinion they had about it. What I didn't expect was how many women were telling her she was wrong.
Mhm.
I had to take a step back because it was a new thing I ran into.
Yeah, yeah. It's people reacting to something. I saw that piece of content too. you're a woman and you're telling me I'm not allowed to be in this space, which is not what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
She was saying these books have been marketed to men. That's how they're designed. And we want to talk about the same thing with Romantasy. They're geared toward women, they're written by women, like they're being marketed to you. That's what's going on, but there's something in these books for everyone.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's like you see the problem and you want a solution, but I don't know how to even envision what that solution looks like.
I joke all the time that a perfect bookstore would be separated by emotion and not
I love
genre.
that.
I want to be miserable today. So here's 10 books in this section that are going to devastate me and I'm going to wonder why I read it and I should probably go to therapy. And then you're like, "Oh, I'm having a bad day and I want to have a good one and here's, some happy, cozy fantasy." But yeah, the idea is like I think about store was separated that way and to your earlier point you were talking about where epic fantasy is right next to romantasy and it's all in the fantasy section. I'm half in, half out on that because it's almost like it eliminates the subgenre. Romantasy at the end of the day, it's so huge that it feels like its own genre, but it's
Yeah.
not. It's a subgenre that blends fantasy and romance, and I think people often get confused on both sides about what that means. And I
Hmm.
think that's where this gender conversation happens often because guys will say, "Oh, well, there wasn't enough fantasy in this one." And then I'll see like women say, "Oh, well, this isn't romantasy because it doesn't have a happily ever after." And I'm like, it's a romance and a fantasy, but it's not. How do you have a genre expectations when you're blending? What are the rules? And
Right.
nobody has that answer.
That's a really good point because there is no expectation for that in fantasy, like even the outcome. I actually have always found that really weird as a person who likes to be emotionally destroyed. That is a part of the romance genre. I had to go deep into the comments of a post at one point to be like, "Can someone please explain this to me? Like why and how and is this a real thing?" And they were like, "Yeah, it is." And I understand people who go into a book and need to know that it's
Mhm.
going to have a happy ending. I just didn't even know that was a thing. And it feels like a really unique criteria for a genre.
Yeah, I don't deep dive this stuff all that often. I've only done it with Romantasy for the sheer fact of trying to be able to be informed enough to make an argument. And the big five definition is basically if either thing was removed from the plot would fall apart and it would require a significant rewrite. So to me, that does not mean that it has to be a 50-50 split. And then there's that argument over like fantasy romance over, romantasy. Like you can make the argument all day, but they're the same thing. Is there a lot of upfront plot and then the romance? Does the romance drive it from the very beginning? It all comes down to, in my opinion, does it fall apart? Do I need to rewrite the story if I pull one or the other? And the reason people don't like that definition, which I think it's too broad too, but is that I can fit Red Rising into it. I can
Hmm.
fit The Witcher. Do I believe that these things are romantasy? No, I don't. The point is that you're arguing something. I didn't make these weird definitions, and
Hmm.
you're only happy to apply it when it benefits your argument.
Hmm.
And that's where I'm like, it's intellectually disingenuous, and
Right.
you're being obtuse on purpose to get your gotcha on the internet, and you won. I don't care at the end of the day. I'm not losing sleep over it, but it bothers me that it's so often used so heavily one side versus the other, and then anytime it's challenged, people get very defensive very quickly.
Yeah, and I feel like the gender aspect doesn't get put forward enough, like as the crux of the conversation. If we're being real here, yes, there's romance, yes, there's fantasy, but like a subgenre was created to create a space for female fantasy authors that were putting romance in it, and that could then be targeted to women. And that's the reason why Red Rising isn't considered a romantasy, is because it doesn't check the demographic boxes
Hmm.
that the marketers wanted to leverage, and that's my issue with it. Like I don't want to call Anathema a romantasy. I don't really believe that it is, and I think that does carry like a disservice
Yeah.
because she wrote a fantasy book and it has romance in there, but I feel like I have to stand up for authors sometimes that you want to put someone in a box just because it's a woman. I've seen so many female authors come out who use initials for their pen name when they publish a book, and I think it's because they don't want to be gendered
Hmm.
to the public.
My favorite is when I talk about this stuff in conversation. I'll say, if it was written by a woman, it would fall into this category. And people get very hung up on the Sanderson argument specifically for some reason. I'll be like, Tress or Yumi or even Mistborn, if it was written by Brenda Sanderson, they would try to
Right.
market it as romantasy. And people are like, no, I don't think any of those books are romantasy. They're rebellion plots and all this other stuff. Maybe Yumi. Yumi might. But the rest, it's very clear it's not. But that's not the point of the argument. And I think that's what people miss is
Hmm.
that it's got nothing to do with the content of the book.
Hmm.
It's about who wrote the book. And then the counter argument I get all the time is, well, Robin Hobb or Fonda Lee. You're talking about powerhouses that have been in the fantasy space well before Romantasy was a thing, before Sarah J. Maas was publishing ACOTAR, who, like Throne of Glass came out and they pushed her into YA
That's
because
right.
that was the box for women before they had Romantasy.
Hmm.
People are very hesitant to call it what it is, and I don't know why.
No, and it doesn't have to be just one thing.
I have people tell me, well, the author doesn't get to decide what genre it is. I'm all for death of the author. I love that argument because really it's about how the reader interprets your work. But
Hmm.
I don't like to tell people they read wrong because I think that's a stupid statement and it's often used to make these counter arguments that I'm talking about.
I think that what's wonderful about reading, period, is being able to have those different perspectives and interpretations and then talk about them. And we've somehow found ourselves in these spaces feeling like we're getting into true political debates over details that are, let's be real, they're actually not that important.
Yes.
Whether a book is categorized as one thing or not, you shouldn't let that ruin your day, people who are in the comments, like
Yes.
fighting for their lives. You're really like hurting yourself by getting so worked up about something that is actually quite subjective. And you want people to have an open mind. I guess that's my optimistic
Yeah.
view is you hope that people are willing to take a new perspective on things, but you just see people get hurt.
Yeah, the internet rewards negativity. The internet rewards doom scrolling. And we are perpetually wired to get hooked into it. And I think what happens is people get to a point where the release is the comment section, and that is not the place to like break the cycle of what's happening. Like
Hmm.
every genre has shitty books. I mean, you fight the good fight. Good for you. Like, I'm done. Like, have a great day. I'm not going to engage with you for another 400 comments about why I believe one thing and you believe the other, and we are not going to find a middle ground here. In my opinion, I think it just hurts the overall landscape for female authors, female content creators, and female readers because you're almost in a position where you're like being forced to pick a side in a
Hmm.
situation where you shouldn't have to. And really, the underlying problem that most people are arguing about is because romanticism isn't literature because it's written by women. I want to be very clear, it's not what I believe, but that is
No,
the argument that's made.
right. And a lot of it is subliminal, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not people really putting that out there. I think that is what prevents people from getting into the space too. I hadn't read a romance until last year, and I will like fully admit that was a gendered prejudice of my own. Those books aren't for me. It was that mindset. And romantasy, I didn't really understand even what it was. It didn't take me long to want to give it a try because I already liked sci-fi and fantasy. And I truly did not know what ACOTAR was going to be. So that's what was fun, that it was like, oh wow, there's a lot of things going on in this series. But I think that those perceptions of who it's for and how it's graded can really push or pull people away from a genre too. And having a whole different experience now and reading lots of different books, it makes me a little sad that we can be so influenced by what is deemed to be male and better that we won't step into a space simply because we don't want to be categorized that way. Feel like that's maybe not the right word choice, but it's,
Labeled. I mean, it's labeled. You
yeah.
don't want to be labeled in a certain way. To your point, it's the societal expectation of your assigned gender. It's the reality of it. I don't like when people try to ignore the reality of a situation for what they believe should be the thing that is how it should be. I think that we should always strive towards that. But if you ignore what the reality of it is, then you're never going to fix it because you can't pretend that that isn't the case. Even if you agree with it, disagree with it, you fundamentally believe it should change at a super deep level,
Hmm.
I would argue all the more reason that you need to recognize. Heated Rivalry is a great example of this. I read Heated Rivalry mostly because of the FOMO train and the hype.
Hmm.
And I took a lot away from that book. That book is full of spice.
Hmm. Sure is, yes.
I'm not leaving my wife for a guy now. That was the number one thing that people were like, "Oh, it's going to turn you gay." And I'm like, "You need a lesson in life because that's just not how things work." I took a lot away from that book because it was eye-opening to me for certain predispositions that even I had. I'm 36. I grew up in school where, your favorite band, that's so gay, I hate that band. That was a common turn of phrase, and it's mind-blowing to me that that is still the mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also not crazy enough to sit here and say everything's fine now because it's 2026 and we don't think about that, because it's the complete opposite. It's still, especially in sports, I think that's why that book is so prominently in the forefront. You want to talk about a place that is still heavy male coded. There's a heavy societal expectation of what a man who plays a sport, especially a violent sport like hockey,
Mm-hmm.
you're not gay.
Yeah.
That's not even a possibility. You
Mm-hmm.
can't be gay. That's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that book does such a great job of exploring what that would do to somebody who was in
Mm-hmm.
that situation. The most profound thing for me was them warring in their heads with, like, this is what I want. This is the person I love. I am so incredibly in the moment. People said there was too much spice, but the spice scenes really is where this gets conveyed the most. In their heads, warring with the fact that this is wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. This
Mm-hmm.
is not what I do. But then at the same time going, this is exactly what I want. This is what I've always wanted. I think more people would benefit from reading things that are not their lived experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think that is a great book for a guy to go pick up and read, even if you don't finish it.
Yeah, or you can skip the spice if that's not your thing. But I agree. I think that the reason why people have gotten so attached to this story is the intimacy that's built into the relationship between these two characters. And it is done through the spice.
Yeah,
It is in those
100%.
moments of closeness that you really witness the stakes that these characters are feeling, the pressure to be what everyone else wants them to be and not the versions of themselves. And I think that's relatable for a lot of people, even if you haven't had that queer experience, you can empathize with someone's struggle. And that's what's really beautiful about it. So, we've been talking about romantasy indirectly. I'm wondering, how have you been received in the book space as a man that's willing to talk about and praise romantasy? Has anything surprised you?
I I think what surprised me most is that the percentage is so low for people that have been, like, genuinely negative or
Hmm.
ridiculous about it. It's higher on TikTok for sure than it is on Instagram.
Okay, interesting.
But even there, it's like a select handful of comments. The reception has not been bad, like,
From
less
like all
hostile.
genders?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I've probably gotten pushback more from women than guys, which I
Interesting.
think is fair because I can totally see the skepticism of, am I grifting and just
Hmm.
making this content to benefit myself because I know it's gonna land with a female audience, and all you have to do is go through 4 or 5 of my reels to know that I have said some stuff that probably would not be well received depending on who the audience is. I would
Hmm.
be, if I was trying to grift, I would be much smarter and safer about my opinions. They are genuinely just my opinions, which I think speaks to the authenticity of content in general and the reward on Instagram specifically. It's not the point of why I did it, and it's always so hard to talk about because I want to talk about it. I want to make sure like there is a clear nuance around goals versus what it became, I guess.
When you say that, you mean you want to talk about like the success that you've had, or you want to talk about your take on the content?
Like why I think it worked. And I think that there are a lot of creators out there that want to have it become a larger thing. I joke that the follower count is a vanity number and it gets more eyes on your content, that kind of stuff. But it's a double edged sword because I want to make this more of a thing where people understand that this is not a negative. This is something that isn't gendered, brings attention to the fact that it's kind of ridiculous and the fact that it's still going on, which means that the more it grows, the
Hmm.
more reach, the more people see it, interact with it, maybe have a change of opinion.
Hmm.
But it's always so hard to say that and be like, I don't want to grow because humbly, I don't care about that piece of it. I care, like, if my engagement plummeted,
Hmm.
I'd be miserable. You can give me 500,000 followers, but if I have an engagement rate of 2%, I
Hmm.
it's defeated the whole purpose. I started all of this really to talk about books with people. I could stop where the number is today and I would never be upset about it as long as I still got the engagement I got and got to have the conversations I've had.
It's really good to see that someone else can come into the space and have a view and provide a different perspective and have that create conversations. That's to me what feels really good in my sphere. I'm not shy to talk about romantasy books, but I am cautious of who I talk about because I'm not always interested in having a debate
Mm,
about what it is and what it isn't. If you, that person, really just has a view on what it is, and you're never going to think differently or be open to really hearing me. But I love when people bring other people into the space. And like, I read Nocticadia with my husband this past fall, and like, I don't think he'd ever read a romance, a gothic romance. It's not a fantasy, but he really enjoyed it. And to me, I love that. I love being able to take something that feels really far out of reach and something you wouldn't experience on your own, share it with someone, navigate it together, and the things you like and you didn't like, and then come away feeling like you have a different perspective. And maybe in another room, you're going to share that perspective with someone else. That's the hope. I think that's why it's really nice bringing men into the mix, because until you sit down and read that book, you just don't know what's going on, but you might
Yeah.
have an opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like that, it's my biggest takeaway from it. Like if you asked me 3 months ago, even would I have picked up Heated Rivalry?
Mm-hmm.
No, because it's not only that it's not marketed to me. I have no connection to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because I think it's not worth reading. It's very much just there's the appeal to it for me is not anything more than FOMO at the time. And I openly admit that I picked up that book because everybody was talking about it, everyone. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I got to at least see. Maybe I don't even finish it. I read a chapter or two and I'm like, whatever, this is not it. But I wouldn't know what I know now had I not at least done that. So, like, there is a benefit to the FOMO. I don't always love it, but and I am susceptible as shit to it. I'm the first one to admit that. But yeah, it has gotten me to read a lot more than I wouldn't have, and then been able to participate and have conversations like this. People will be like, "Oh, it's male romance. Or you're a straight guy with a wife. Why would that appeal to you at all?" And I'm like, the romance piece of it doesn't really matter. Like
Yeah.
I very recently got Our Rogue Fates, which is a male fantasy romance.
Mm.
And the whole reason I bring it up is it won. I did a community book awards at the end of the year last year, and that won spiciest book in
Okay.
trad pub, which then was like not definitely not my appeal, because now it's spice on top of like, and that sounds like it's the focus, but it's not the
Mm.
focus. And there's a lot of thematic stuff. But the whole reason I picked it up was talking with her and finding out the other stuff she's written and her background. She's written a bunch of stuff for Critical Role. She's written in Star Wars books. Like, I would have never known that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have just dodged this book had I not said to myself, I should at least have a conversation about it and look. And it sounds really good. It sounds really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But yeah, I wouldn't have read that 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Content has given me that too. I get to have these conversations I would have not even thought about or given a second look to, that I will now pick up and read and possibly enjoy. Like, if somebody pitched Daggermouth to me as a dystopian romance, I would have just been like, that's not my thing. I don't really want to read a whole book about like a romance in a shitty time. That sounds like not fun.
Right. Yeah.
Completely wrong. Lives up to the hype, for the
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
The FOMO warranted on that one.
Mm-hmm. So regardless of genre or regardless of the gender of the author, what do you really think are the things that make readers connect to stories?
It's an emotional connection to the book in some way, shape, or form. 90% of readers are not reading from a literature angle where they're analyzing it like it's coursework. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I laugh when the literature argument is made, because there's nothing wrong with reading a book for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lazy, annoying argument to say, oh, it's not literature because you're reading it for entertainment. You're looking for an academic, smart way to make a subjective argument and try to turn it objective. Either you've never read it and you don't like it because it's the genre that it is,
Mm-hmm.
or you genuinely just don't think that it's literature at all, and you're only reading academic textbooks or like things like, Stoner. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
there's
Like,
there's an elitist view
yeah.
that comes into play there for sure.
But I think majority of people are just trying to take a subjective argument and make it sound objective. But I think that at the end of the day, most readers are emotional. You talk to any guy who's read Red Rising or any woman that's read Red Rising, most of the takeaways are the same. The takeaways from those books are always going to be like the heavy, impactful, emotional scenes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a spoiler for anybody that hasn't read it, but I can say I am no builder to anybody that's read the original trilogy, and they instantly know what I'm talking about. Now, to
Mm-hmm.
anybody else who's never read it, it means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a quotable line at all. It doesn't even make sense. It's about what it's tied to in the book, a thing people that resonates with everybody that reads it, regardless of gender and regardless of genre. That emotional tie to what happened. Like, I think regardless of gender, regardless of genre, the author, any of it, you're always going to remember 20 years down the line why you enjoyed a book, and it's going to be tied to something that it made you feel,
Yeah. When we talk about these like gender stereotypes and these prejudices that exist around genres, the classical literature element to it, I think that people forget that the human experience is inherently emotional. Like when you think about your core memories, the things that define you as a human being, big, small, whatever, they are coded with emotions. And that's the reason why people love books. Like the layers of emotion in a book can be vastly different. The impact can be huge regardless. And I
Mhm.
think that is the piece that does get missed. And I think that people who love classic literature, they are drawn toward it and they are having those same experiences, but it's not going to be for everyone. And so
Yeah.
cast that brush across genres as if it's not the same or not valuable. It's strange because books and book series that I love, I finish those series and I will miss those characters for the rest of my life until I read that series again. Sci-fi, fantasy, it doesn't matter what the genre is. You can't have characters that live inside your brain rent-free and you miss if it's not an emotional connection.
Yeah, I think the reason I bring up Stoner, John Williams wrote an entire book about a normal guy who made some bad decisions, and he lives his very normal life, making it harder for himself. And it's just a viscerally human book where you have a viscerally human experience while you read it, but it's boring as shit. Everybody that talks about that book talks about how boring it is because it is. It's incredibly boring, and it's still somehow an incredible book because of how easy it is to resonate with the humanity of what it is. And I that is why it's a classic, because only a classic could be a book that is universally talked about how boring it is, but at the same time is revered as such a great classic piece of literature. And I think that there are books even today in the fantasy genre, in the lit fic genre, romance genre, anything like that, where you have that same kind of visceral connection to it and the humanity of it all. You know, it's funny you say, like, I say humanity of like sci-fi and fantasy and stuff like that, but in all reality, I don't think I've ever read a fantasy or a sci-fi that was so disconnected from humanity, or at least some kind of a human element, whether it be love or, found family, or, there's a reason that certain tropes are in every single one of these books because it's what grounds the reader into a connection with the characters. If you created a truly like out there, and I'm sure there are some series, whatever, but I haven't found any. I have not found any that doesn't have some kind of grounding in humanity to
Mm-hmm.
what is going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ability to show characters that are fully dimensional and have flaws.
Yes.
You notice it in a book when a character feels 2D or flat
Hmm.
because people don't exist that way. They say the wrong thing, they have messy thoughts, and that's very relatable. So, yeah, I find that whole discourse very, very interesting. And again, it's people choosing what is the right way to read and what to read just boggles my mind. But
Yeah.
not an
It's
argument I'm going to win today. So I'll
no.
just share my take.
I hear you on that. Like I was at a Ryan Cahill signing on Friday, and he was talking about how morally gray is something that people love to talk about. Morally gray characters. Everybody needs a morally gray character in their book, like right now. He literally said, I don't know what the fuck people are talking about. You're making human characters. That's why people like morally gray characters. Humans aren't black and white. They're not heroes riding out on the white knight horse and saving the world while also not doing something wrong. Morally gray's bullshit. You're just making human characters, and people need a way to name it because they don't want to feel like they're reading a fantasy with a human in it. Everything I love is morally gray because everything I love is human. It has that human emotional element.
Yeah. I mean, I do think the morally gray is another gender marketing spin that got created. It's like, how can we describe the bad boy without calling him the bad boy?
Yeah, it's applied though. I see it applied to Grimdark, Jay
Interesting.
Kristoff, Empire of the Vampire. That's how he's described. Sun Eater.
Okay.
Hadrian is described as like a morally gray protagonist.
hmm
I think I get what you're saying. Like I definitely see it more prominently in like romance and romantasy.
hmm
I had to ask somebody the other day what a morally black character was. Not my steez, but I
Yeah.
needed a definition because I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's I don't know. It's a weird way to classify human behavior, I guess. But
hmm
it's again probably a marketing thing if I had to guess.
Yeah. And maybe like people not wanting to call someone evil because that's too
Yeah.
leading. But it's kind of in that sphere of it's like you don't want to call them evil, you don't want to call them an anti-hero because those define a direction of a story
Mm.
around a character that you're not going to reveal. Yeah, my experience has definitely been more of the like romance, romantasy space. And it's like enemies to lovers. Are we just going to call it all enemies to lovers? And
I ranted about this about Daggermouth. If people want an actual definition of what that is, read that book. That's
agreed.
real. That's what I would expect. It's inconvenience to lovers is most of the time. Any enemy to lover that I've dealt with is normally you annoy me and now we love
Yeah.
each other. Not like you literally viscerally hate me.
All right. Well, this was so much fun, Devin. I'm really glad you joined me on here. And before we sign off, I think there's nothing better than a book rec from a friend. And we are friends now, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I need your personalized book rec.
Based on what you've talked about in the books that you enjoy, have you read Empire of the Vampire?
No, I haven't.
That would be. I will caveat it with it is a frame narrative.
What does that mean?
So it's written from a perspective of the character that it's involving, but after the events. So
Okay.
it's almost like
Interesting.
a retelling. It's basically his captor, and he's wanting him to tell him. It's definitely gritty, dark.
Okay. That's fine.
It lives and dies on a romance, but it's not the most forefront of the story, but the story basically hinges on it, and that's how it sparks and starts. And if I had to define a morally gray character,
Mm-hmm.
like you will find yourself questioning whether or not you like this person or you're rooting for them.
Okay. I love that.
And Jay Kristoff, the only male author I have ever seen that has written intimacy on the page
Mm-hmm.
and nailed the notes of why it works in romantasy and romance
Okay.
because
Cool.
it's emotion forward. The spice is the spice, it's there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely that introspective piece of it at the same time, the emotions of the moment, the competing warring thoughts, all that kind of stuff that makes what spice is work so well, especially normally from the female author's perspective, because I think they nail that when they write it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, one of my Mount Rushmore series. So if you
Okay.
hate it, don't feel bad. I will not be upset, only a little. If you like audio, the audiobook is so
Okay.
good. Because the other thing I will caveat it with, it's written like Interview with a Vampire. So he
Okay.
starts every single sentence with a quote.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because it's being told and recorded in a journal, and
Okay.
he takes the literal approach with that, which is not what a lot of people do in Framed.
Okay.
It can be jarring, but yeah, it's incredible and like a fun little random Jake Kristoff fact. He went to his wife and she handed him her favorite books with spice, and he basically read nothing but spice for like 4 days straight
Wow.
before he wrote his spice. And then 90% of his beta readers, I think, are women. So he had
Interesting.
like
Okay.
his seal of approval, I guess, on the Spice network. So it's a very impressive thing. He's a very unique male author in that sense.
Okay, well, I'm sold. Something I want to find in 2026 is those like male authors that are doing female characters and romance, these sorts of things well, because I think that's one of I get a little itchy sus about it. Like, I don't trust a male author. So I want to shift my perspective on that.
I will tell you, though, one I found that was really impressive that's no spice, if you're looking, is The Bone Raiders by Jackson Ford.
Okay, I don't know if I know that one.
Three or four POVs, all women main cast, all female main characters. They're all badasses, but they're not. I'm angry at the world, and
Hmm,
the only thing that motivates me is rage. Like it's
right.
very impressive how
Hmm,
well he dodges those typical male pitfalls when they write female main characters.
hmm.
He was a hardcore sci-fi writer, so
Okay,
he has some interesting takes. But yes, it's basically like Mad Max, except they ride fire-breathing lizards.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that if you're looking for something not spice, no spice.
Interesting. Well, they both sound great. My TBR is unhinged, but I just treat it like a spinning wheel. I just figure out as I go what makes sense to read. And I don't care if I don't finish it before I die, because I probably won't. So that's okay.
I am right there with you. I was going to say, fun one, flip it. What is the book I must read this year, in your opinion?
Is this like any book at all?
It could be
Any
anything. Yeah,
genre?
I don't care.
Well, there's a couple that I really love to recommend to people that are not fantasy and they are not romantasy. Um, it remind the first one when you were talking about stoner. There's a book called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's a classic, but it's like 1920s, 1940s classic. So the writing style is easy to read, and it is like literally in the introduction, it says if I told you what this book about, I would do this book a disservice. because
Okay.
it's not really like about anything. It's about a time and it's about a family, but it's a really beautiful, well, it's beautiful and sad. It's a sad kind of story because it's about a poor family in New York, and it's just like a great story, one that I have read twice and I will read it again, and it's not on my shelf because my friend's reading it right now. So that is one. And the other one that I like never see, that if you want a bit of emotional destruction, is called The Book Thief. And
I've heard of that one.
yeah, it's set in Germany during the Second World War, and it's about a young girl who gets adopted into a German family. And so the story is kind of told through this 8-year-old's eyes. She doesn't
Okay.
understand what's going on, and she's been taken away from her parents, and they're burning books. It's like, if you talk about emotional destruction, no book has ever hit me like that book hit me. So
Okay.
yeah, a couple out of left field, but I think the book people should read as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that is a wrap for today. And as promised, this is going to be really fun for me because I'm really excited to announce the next Quick Lit book pick, because this book has taken the book community by storm over the last 2 months since its release. I'm going to see if you can guess the book, Devin.
I mean, I have a feeling I know exactly what book it's going to be.
You know. So Daggermouth is the book, and I am so excited to talk about this book. It is book one of a new dystopian romance duology, if you haven't heard of it. It's being praised for being true dystopian and a story that feels both unsettling and comforting in its ability to reflect the chaos of our world today. So this book, I don't know that I've ever highlighted so many lines in a book as I have in this
Same.
book. It's just, yeah. I have so much to say about it. And if you haven't read it yet, now is a really great time. Get it on your short list and then tune in to the next episode. We will be bringing a spoiler-free review up front, and then we will get into the spoilery bits. So even if you haven't read it, you can hop on and we will give you the cue when it's time to go. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for hanging out with us. And this is Fantasy Femme Fatales, and we're out.
Bye, all. Thank you.